Hi, automotive enthusiasts. Welcome to Boost Bureau, where we explore machines, culture, and the stories that move us. Today, we're diving into a luxury sedan that once tried to bridge two worlds. The Maserati Quattroporte III, built from 1979 to 1990. This was Italy's grand attempt to bring the flair of Modena into the realm of stately executive cars. And it's a story filled with elegance, ambition, missteps, and unexpected second lives. Over the course of this video, we'll trace its origins, its uneasy place in the American market, and the way it has aged into an underappreciated gem that now tempts collectors with both allure and risk. Our journey will show how a car can be more than a machine. It can be a reflection of economic tides, cultural appetites, and the eternal tension between artistry and practicality. Imagine the late 1970s. Oil crises reshaped priorities, yet luxury still carried power, and Maserati, fresh from a troubled period of ownership changes, dared to introduce a hand-built sedan styled by Giorgetto Giugiaro, powered by racing-bred V8s, and meant to challenge Mercedes and Jaguar. On paper, it promised everything. Italian passion wrapped in a dignified suit, capable of carrying diplomats, CEOs, or movie stars in the same breath. But reality was more complicated, as reliability concerns, rising costs, and limited brand presence in the US meant the car never quite became the success Maserati hoped for. Yet today, the Quattroporte III occupies an intriguing space. Old enough to be collectible, rare enough to turn heads, and cheap enough to attract enthusiasts who dream of exotic ownership without Ferrari or Lamborghini price tags. In this episode, we'll unpack how the Quattroporte III came to be, how it struggled to carve a niche in America, and how its legacy has evolved from forgotten luxury to potential cult classic. You'll hear stories of design meetings, cultural reception, the delicate balance of hand craftsmanship against modern demands, and the way owners and enthusiasts today keep these sedans alive against the odds. The narrative will not just be about the technical side, though we'll touch on what makes the car unique under the hood, but also about the human side. Who bought them? Who kept them running? And why, in an age of digital convenience, people are still drawn to a 30-plus-year-old Italian sedan with quirks and charm. So buckle in, because this journey is about more than horsepower. It's about aspiration, imperfection, and rediscovery. And by the end, you'll see why this overlooked Maserati deserves a fresh look through the lens of time and culture, especially here in America, where opportunities for ownership are better than ever, thanks to shifting values and open import rules. The Maserati Quattroporte III's origin story begins with the turbulence of the 1970s, when Maserati found itself passed between owners and caught in the uncertainty of the global oil crises. The company needed a halo car that could restore prestige while tapping into a more stable market. Luxury sedans had always been a symbol of power, and executives from Rome to Los Angeles still demanded cars that could project wealth and authority. So Maserati turned to Giorgetto Giugiaro, the master stylist of Ital design, to pen a shape that combined gravitas with modern lines. The result was a long, low sedan with crisp edges, subtle aggression, and enough presence to rival German rivals. Yet the design was not purely for flair. It reflected a vision of Maserati repositioning itself as a serious player in the executive space, signaling to the world that it could craft more than exotic coupes and sports cars. Micro-story. Picture a boardroom in 1976, where Maserati executives present sketches of the future sedan. One image shows a bold angular profile, another a more restrained formal saloon. Arguments circle around whether to lean into flamboyance or restraint. Eventually, the Giugiaro design that leaned toward formality wins, because Maserati believed the market craved respectability more than show. The gamble was that Italian elegance could sell against the upright Mercedes W116 and the British Jaguar XJ. This decision shaped the Quattroporte III's identity as not just another Maserati, but a statement that Italy could do boardroom elegance. Micro-story. By the time the car debuted in 1979 at the Turin Motor Show, it had an aura of hand-built exclusivity. Unlike mass-produced German sedans, each Quattroporte III came together slowly at Maserati's Modena workshops, with artisans fitting leather interiors and wood trim by hand. American journalists marveled at the atmosphere inside, comparing it to a private club on wheels. Yet whispers of reliability concerns were never far away, even in those first tests. The duality of a car so intoxicating in presence but so uncertain in day-to-day use became the central theme of its American life. Context Digest. To understand why Maserati bet on a sedan, consider the global luxury car market of the late 1970s. Mercedes had the S-Class, Jaguar the XJ, BMW the growing 7 Series, and even Cadillac was clinging to its status with big V8 barges. Maserati saw an opening. If it could capture buyers who wanted exclusivity and weren't satisfied with mainstream luxury, it could carve a lucrative niche. But this was a time of recession, inflation, and energy anxiety. So launching a hand-built V8 luxury sedan was both daring and risky. Micro story. For American enthusiasts, the Quattroporte 3 was exotic. Few had ever seen one in the metal. Imported through limited channels, it stood out in Beverly Hills and Manhattan alike as something special. Celebrities such as Frank Sinatra were rumored to admire them. And in Europe, it even carried heads of state. Yet for every glamorous image, there was also the reality of a finicky car that could leave owners stranded. The paradox became clear. The very exclusivity that made it special also meant few mechanics knew how to keep it healthy on US soil. Reflection bridge. This tension between allure and fragility would define the Quattroporte 3's next decade in America, as it struggled to prove its worth in a land where practicality often outweighed passion. Micro story. Owners who did take the plunge often describe it as a love affair. Imagine pulling up to a country club in the early 1980s in a car none of your peers could identify. The long hood, the Trident badge, the Italian leather, all spoke of sophistication. But under the surface, the Bosch fuel injection, electrical quirks, and cooling issues meant owners needed patience and dedication. Still, those who endured had stories worth telling. Every successful drive felt like a small victory, a moment of triumph over unpredictability. Context Digest. Importing the Quattroporte 3 was not straightforward. Maserati had no robust dealer network in the US, so customers relied on small independent importers and boutique dealerships. This meant parts availability was inconsistent and support was thin. Contrast that with Mercedes, which had dozens of service centers nationwide. Buyers of the Maserati weren't just buying a car. They were entering a world of specialist knowledge and long-distance phone calls to Italy. Micro story. One such dealership in New York built its reputation on catering to Italian car enthusiasts. Mechanics there kept a backlog of Maseratis waiting for service, from Miracs to Quattroportes. Customers accepted long wait times. Because owning such a rare machine meant tolerating delays, those service bays became cultural hubs, where stories of unreliable alternators mixed with admiration for the way the car looked gliding down Park Avenue. Here, ownership wasn't just transportation, it was membership in a rare club. Reflection bridge. Slowly, the Quattroporte 3 built a mythology in America. It wasn't about numbers sold, but about the experiences of those few who dared to live with it. Context Digest. Compared with its competitors, the Maserati was an anomaly. Mercedes emphasized durability, Jaguar highlighted tradition, BMW marketed driving dynamics, and Cadillac leaned on domestic comfort. Maserati alone promised a blend of exotic sports car DNA and a sedan body, which for some was irresistible. But the numbers never added up. Too expensive to be mainstream, too fragile to be practical, and too unknown to build momentum. Micro story. As the 1980s wore on, the car remained a rare sight. Only a few thousand were built in total, and fewer still reached the US. Enthusiasts who spotted one in traffic often remember the event decades later, because the sight of a Quattroporte 3 was like encountering a unicorn. This scarcity made it a legend in whispers, more often discussed than seen in person. Micro story. Toward the late 1980s, Maserati updated the car with subtle refinements. Yet it was clear the market had moved on. The Germans were stronger than ever. The Japanese had entered the luxury arena with Lexus and Acura, and Maserati's old-world approach felt out of step. Still, for loyalists, the Quattroporte 3 held its charm. a stubborn reminder that cars could still be crafted like tailored suits rather than mass-produced appliances. The arc of its first decade ends with a question. Could a car so out of sync with mainstream demands still carve a place for itself in America, or was it destined to remain a forgotten footnote? That question leads us deeper into its legacy and the next chapter of its journey. As the 1990s dawned, the Maserati Quattroporte III found itself in an awkward position. No longer a new contender, not yet a vintage classic. It straddled a strange middle ground where prestige had faded, but maintenance challenges remained. Yet, this was also the moment when its long-term identity began to crystallize, as survivors started to transition from daily drivers into collector curiosities. This shift was subtle, but it would set the stage for the car's reputation today. Micro-story. Imagine a proud original owner in Los Angeles who purchased a Quattroporte III in the early 1980s, only to realize by 1992 that the car was worth a fraction of what they paid. German sedans held value, but the Maserati depreciated. Brutally. Still, instead of trading it in, the owner tucked it into a garage, rationalizing that one day its rarity might matter. Years later, their gamble proved right, as the very obscurity that once made it a burden turned it into an exotic. Survivor, a story echoed in many households across America. Micro-story. The 1990s also brought a new wave of luxury buyers, many of whom sought Japanese reliability and modern amenities. Cars like the Lexus LS400 set new benchmarks for quietness and dependability. Against this backdrop, the Quattroporte III looked archaic, with wood trim that cracked, switches that failed, and mechanical systems that demanded constant attention. But for a niche group of enthusiasts, that very anachronism became the draw, a link to a world before. Corporate polish when cars felt more artisanal than engineered to perfection. Context digest. The American collector scene of the 1990s was heavily skewed toward muscle cars and high-profile exotics. Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and Porsche turbos got the spotlight. Maserati sedans were left in the shadows, considered too troublesome to be desirable. This neglect kept prices low, which in turn allowed adventurous hobbyists to pick them up cheaply, sometimes for less than the cost of a new family sedan. These bargain hunters laid the groundwork for the car's slow rebirth as a cult collectible. Micro-story. One restorer in Florida recalls buying 3 Quattroporte IIIs for the price of a single running Mercedes S-Class. The plan was to combine the best parts from all 3 to create one solid car. While the project took years and more money than expected, the finished result became a conversation piece at every show. People unfamiliar with Maserati's sedan heritage were stunned by its presence, and even skeptics admitted it had charisma no German rival could replicate. Reflection bridge. These grassroots restoration efforts, born out of passion rather than profit, slowly shifted perceptions and gave the Quattroporte III new relevance in America. Micro-story. By the 2000s, online communities and forums allowed scattered owners to connect. Suddenly, obscure knowledge about sourcing trim pieces or rebuilding fuel injection systems could be shared across continents. What was once an isolating ownership experience became a collaborative one. Owners traded stories, posted photos, and documented their triumphs and failures. This digital camaraderie helped keep cars alive that might otherwise have been scrapped. Context digest. At the same time, Maserati itself was undergoing reinvention. Rescued under new ownership and preparing to relaunch in the US with modern models, the brand leaned on its heritage to add credibility. The Quattroporte. Name returned with a new generation in 2003, but enthusiasts who remembered the 3 recognized a direct lineage. Though rarely celebrated officially, the old Giugiaro sedan suddenly looked like an important bridge between eras. Micro-story. Auction houses began to take notice. By the late 2000s, listings for well-preserved Quattroporte IIIs began to attract attention from bidders who once overlooked them. Prices didn't skyrocket, but the trend was clear. Collectors were beginning to understand that hand-built Italian sedans of the late 20th century represented a unique chapter in automotive history. What was once a $10,000 curiosity could now command several times that if it was clean and documented. Reflection bridge. This slow revaluation highlighted a truth about the Quattroporte 3. Its worth was not measured in performance statistics, but in narrative and presence. Micro-story. Owners who brought their cars to Cars and Coffee. Events found themselves surrounded by curious onlookers who had never seen one before. The Trident badge sparked recognition, but the sedan shape confused expectations. Some mistook it for a Jaguar or even a Lincoln, until the details gave it away. This ambiguity made the car a magnet for conversation, a way for owners to share a piece of history that felt hidden in plain sight. Context digest. Compared with other collectible sedans, the Maserati remained risky. Parts scarcity persisted, electrical gremlins lingered, and resale values were unpredictable. But its appeal lay in what economists call positional goods, things valued precisely because they're rare and misunderstood. Within the U.S. collector market, the Quattroporte III became a contrarian's choice, signaling that the owner valued character and story over predictability. Micro-story. By the 2010s, the cars that survived were often cherished examples passed down or obsessively maintained. One enthusiast in Texas, for instance, kept meticulous binders of every repair and photo-documented decades of ownership. When displayed at shows, the binder itself became as fascinating as the car, illustrating the dedication required to keep such a machine alive. The narrative of endurance was inseparable from the machine itself. Micro-story. Another aspect that grew in relevance was the car's soundtrack. The burble of its V8, tuned more for character than raw numbers, stood out in a world increasingly dominated by turbocharged sixes and hybrid drivetrains. At Car Meets, starting one up was a sensory reminder of an era when engines were not only functional, but emotional instruments. This visceral connection helped a new generation of enthusiasts appreciate the car despite never having seen it in period. The story of the Quattroporte III's survival into modern times is not just about metal and mechanics. It's about how communities, narratives, and cultural memory can rescue a forgotten machine from obscurity and turn it into an icon. For those willing to look past imperfections, and that momentum brings us to its place in today's world, where rarity, nostalgia, and shifting values intersect to shape its ongoing legacy. And so, automotive enthusiasts, we come to the end of our exploration here on Overdrive Insider. Through the story of the Maserati Quattroporte III, we've seen how a single car can embody the tension between aspiration and reality, between craftsmanship and practicality, between fleeting relevance and enduring fascination. It began as Maserati's gamble to challenge the established titans of luxury with a hand-built sedan of Italian grace, entered America as a rare and polarizing presence, and endured years of neglect before being rediscovered by a new generation of collectors and dreamers. Its journey reminds us that value is not always measured in sales numbers or performance charts, but in the persistence of passion and the resonance of design. Today, the Quattroporte III offers something few modern cars can: the chance to own a living contradiction, one that rewards patience, demands respect, and pays back in character what it lacks in predictability. This is the gift of time, turning flaws into stories and rarity into allure. As we close, think of how many cars on the road now will earn the same fate decades from today. How many overlooked models will find champions willing to keep them alive? The Maserati teaches us that sometimes the most meaningful machines are the ones that resist easy categorization. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history, culture, and the resilience of automotive spirit. Until next time, drive with curiosity, appreciate the imperfect, and stay passionate. Farewell, automotive enthusiasts, from all of us at Overdrive Insider.